Good afternoon, everybody. So nice of you to come out to this talk. For the next 20 minutes or so, I'll be talking at you. But before I do, I want to make some disclaimers about this presentation. Mainly, I want to do that to set some expectations of what you will get, also what you will not get. But I also really want to encourage a certain way of consuming this presentation. Disclaimer 1, there's no learning here. I have no advice, I have no best practices, I have no tricks, no tips, no life hacks. You are not allowed to learn here. If you have your notebook open, a laptop, anything to take notes, feel free to close that. You're not going to need it. The slides have nothing of substance. There's no need to screenshot them or film them. No learning. My goal here today is hopefully to be somewhat entertaining. With a bit of luck, I can get you to scratch your head a bit, maybe laugh a little. Ideally, you leave a tiny bit inspired, but no learning. Disclaimer 2. I've done this presentation once before in Lithuania, and was, to my idea, a disaster. And so I rewrote the entire thing from scratch, which, in a way fits on a meta level very much with this title of the presentation of Do Repeat Yourself. So that's fun. Which brings me to the final disclaimer. What you see here, is not Impress.js. When I say I've written everything from scratch, I mean I've built this software to present this presentation specifically for this conference only. The last 3 days, I've slept very little, I've eaten very little, I had lots of anxiety sweats. This is a presentation built on tears and no sleep. Given that it's written in 3 days and it's written by me, there's a very high likelihood that it will crash. I apologize in advance, and I hope we can get past it together. Now, to explain why I want to talk about repetition, I have to explain a bit about why I want to talk about repetition. And for that, I want to tell you a bit about language learning and how I think about language learning. Not specifically programming language learning, just general language learning. I think languages afford us quite a lot of things in the way we interact with the world. The thing that I don't want to focus on are the kind of active or direct benefits of learning a language. So you learn Greek, you have an easy time ordering food and getting around Athens. You learn Python, you know how to write instructions for a computer. To me, that's not all that interesting. What I want to focus on is something that's a little harder to define or grasp, kind of the intuitive part of languages. If you ever learned an instrument, then at some point some musician with like 20 years of experience probably came up to you and saw you struggling on your drums or your guitar or whatever, and just looked at you and said, just gotta feel the music, man, which is a totally unhelpful thing to say to somebody who's learning an instrument. Until you finally feel the music. And then you're like, yeah, man, feel the music. That's kind of the thing that I'm looking for. So what does this kind of intuition look like in Python? And to me, I think there are 2 dimensions that I care about. For me, it is the way you perceive the world and the way in which this language intuition forms your personality. So when I say the way you experience the world, right? Like that's not in your IDE, that's just when you're out and about in every regular, everyday situation. How does knowing Python affect how you interact with things? Well, I think one sentiment that is very prominent in programming in general is this idea of breaking down problems into smaller, manageable parts. I used to teach Python quite some time ago, and at the time, I always said in order to become a good software engineer, you have to learn to break problems down into smaller parts. By now, I'm not all that convinced of that anymore. I think it's more the other way around. I think it is that because you are writing Python and because you are programming, you gain this intuition of how to break things down. Similarly, I think debugging difficult problems, like really diving into some obscure issue, is something that really empowers you in introspection and self-reflection. So it allows you to look back on your own life, on interactions that you've had. And in general, the explicitness of programming, I think, is super beneficial in how you communicate with people. So many understandings come from vague communication, not being explicit enough, not being to the point enough. Well, a computer does not understand. It's going to throw an error at you. It's not going to, pretend to understand, but actually didn't understand. And then you had a fight later on. I think these things give you a different way of engaging with people and the world around you. The second dimension I want to talk about is how an intuition for a language forms your personality. Like, how does engaging with Python more or repeating something more form the way you engage with that language, or how you write it even? You know how when you're writing in your regular language, whether it's Greek or English, some things just feel better than others. Some things feel more you than others. There are certain mannerisms, there are certain sentences that you just continually return to because they are you. The same things happen in Python, I think. You find libraries that you really love. You discover ways of writing code. Maybe you're really into typing. Maybe you're really into Jupyter notebooks, whatever. It all kind of defines your personality. And, you become so convinced of how good that is that you get into flame wars on the internet about, what's better, polars or pandas. But to me, there is no best personality. Like, there is no good or bad way of doing it. I think the only bad thing would be to have no personality at all. And so with all this, we have covered a bit of why I want to talk about repetition, because believe it or not, my preferred strategy to build Python intuition is repeated engagements. Repetition generally gets a bad rap with developers. There's even this principle of do not repeat yourself, which is what I modeled the title of my talk around. But I think repetition can be fun. I think sometimes the next time it's even more fun than the last. From repetition, we get a certain knowledge. We get a familiarity with a domain. We kind of know what to expect. We know what comes next. You also find out what you don't know yet. But from this safety, we get a confidence to go into these things that are maybe unfamiliar to us. You tackle problems more confidently. You tackle bigger problems. If we do enough repetition, we also get faster. Increasingly, we get a certain rhythm in our work. We don't get stuck on the same problems. We don't have to look up for the 50th time how to center a div. At some point, you just know. And all of this allows us to engage more and more with complexity. Complexity to me is not the enemy, which also I think is not a very popular sentiment in developer communities. Generally, it's all about simplicity. But to me, it is in complexity that we get these aha moments of suddenly you feel the music. This being a Python conference, we're going to switch to some code now. You'll see how it works out later. I'm going to breeze through it a bit I hope you understand why in a minute. I recently learned that you can use NumPy to generate music because sound is just waves, and waves are NumPy arrays. So if we're going to make something like a drum beat, we basically create a pure wave of a low frequency, like the higher the frequency, the higher the pitch. Then we have to apply this thing called an ADSR envelope, which, if we focus a bit on the A and D, attack and decay, for a drum beat, it's like this loud thud. So the attack is really quick and the decay is really quick. And that's how that sound wave ends up looking. Then we do this very weird NumPy stuff to actually create something that can be turned into sound. And then we run it. Should be playing, unless the sound is off. So there we have it. A little bass drum in the background. Okay. Well, I guess we saw this coming. Give me a second. I luckily know why. Let me mute this while I fix it. All right. Let's hope it does not happen again. Where was I? All right, so my favorite strategy of cultivating intuition is repeated engagement. I think repetition generally gets a bad rap with developers, it being boring, but I think repetition can be a lot of fun. Oftentimes, the next time is even more fun than the last. What we get from repetition is a certain knowledge. We get a familiarity, kind of see what's gonna come ahead. We know what to expect. And so we know where to go next, what the next unknown is. That familiarity gives us a certain confidence from which we can go into these unknown problems. We can tackle more difficult questions. And as we repeat more and more, we become faster. We go through our talking points faster. We don't need to spend as much time because we already know certain things. You get less stuck. And all of this is so that we can engage with complexity more often and with more complex complexity. Because to me, complexity is not the enemy. Complexity is very much the goal. Complexity is where we get these aha moments where suddenly we feel the music. All right, let's dive into some code. I'm going to breeze through it a bit. I hope you understand why. I recently learned you can make drum samples with NumPy, and all drum samples are really similar. So we're going to make a drum kit. So we define some frequencies for various parts of the drum kit. Then we apply this ASDR envelope depending on the instrument. And finally, we do some more magic, combine it into a composition, and we play it. It should be playing. Ah, thanks. So we have a little beat going on. Right. Guess we saw that coming. I know why it happened though. Let me pretend to fix it. All right, where was I? Repeated engagements. That's my preferred strategy for building intuition. Every time we come back to something, we kind of see something new, we learn something new. And repetition often gets a rap for being boring. I think you can repeat something quite often before it gets dull. What we get from repetition is a certain familiarity. Kind of start to think, we know what's going to happen, we know what's going to come. And it gives us this certain confidence to tackle problems. And we start to speed through our slides or whatever it is that we're doing more and more. And this allows us to engage with complexity more often, because it is in complexity that we discover variations and things that we did not know before. We find things that we were not even looking for. We discover libraries, we discover other ways of doing things. And if we discover enough, suddenly we don't just feel the music, we also feel the code. Let's make some music. So, from what I know, you can make music with NumPy. But to be honest, I've spent quite a lot of time on this, and it really kind of sucks. There are better ways. In my case, for this specific presentation, I used PyDub. And so, let's make something a little more melodic. Let's play a key. You want to guess what happens next? All right, I'm going to do it one last time. Repeated engagement or repetition is my preferred way of building intuition. I've built this software twice now, and I look very much forward to building it a third, a fourth, a fifth, and a sixth time from scratch over and over and over. And I know it will be different every time, and it will sometimes suck more, and it will sometimes be better. Because I think the more often I repeat it, the more complex it gets, and the bigger the chances that I will stumble upon this intuition. Because intuition comes from this complexity. It are these moments where it suddenly just clicks. It's not a structured approach. There is no code academy to gaining Pythonic enlightenment. And I think repetition is the thing that gets us to this point of complexity. Every time we return to a problem, every time we return to something we did, you find something new. This is why people are so obsessed with rewriting in Rust. It's not because it's Rust, it's because it's rewriting. And that's the interesting part. And to finish, I want to end with the hottest takes of all, which I guess is very much the theme of my presentation implicitly. But I very much disagree with the Zen of Python. I don't think simple is better than complex. In fact, I think it is the opposite. I think complex is much, much better than simple. Thank you.